Hello, hello. Welcome back to the Life Short Talk Fast podcast. My name is Tiffany Jackson, and I am your host. Today, we're going to be doing our first edition of Review the Queue. Now, for those of you who don't know, my husband and I are avid collectors of movies, DVDs, Blu-rays, whatever, and we like to watch them. When we do get movies, we put them in a watch queue. We each get a pick. My son gets a pick. Our best friend gets a pick, and we just cycle through them. This week, we're going to be talking about 30 Days of Night. Now, I am going to go off on a tangent about vampire movies, so bear in mind, my top 3 vampire movies are as follows. Number 1, Lost Boys. Will always be my favorite vampire movie. Nobody can rock a platinum mullet like Kiefer Sutherland, and they were actual vampires. Okay? Number 2, Dracula Dead and Loving It. Listen, I am a Mel Brooks girly. Will always be a Mel Brooks girly. I grew up on him. So his brand of humor hits me right in my funny bone. Like immediately in my funny bone. And the fact that he cast Leslie Nielsen as his... Is that his name? If I'm wrong, I'm wrong. But cast him as his Dracula was phenomenal. And then Steven Weber as Jonathan. Listen, I may talk about the Shining miniseries at some point, and I'm going to clown on Steven Weber. But Wings is one of my favorite older TV shows. And this version of Dracula is one of my absolute favorites. And the fact that Mel cast himself as Abraham von Helsing, 10 out of 10. 10 out of fucking 10. And then number 3 would be Van Helsing. I know not a lot of people love that movie, but I really think that movie is misunderstood and it's not given the respect or due that it deserves. Truly. The effects still hold up. The storyline still holds up. Kate Beckinsale is fucking fantastic. Hugh Jackman is wonderful. I forget who plays Dracula in that movie, but that is a definitive Dracula for me. It is one of the versions that I consider, that is who Bram Stoker had in mind. You know what I mean? It's kind of like Gary Oldman in Bram Stoker's Dracula, or Bela Lugosi is a lot of people's Dracula, or Christopher Lee. Like, honestly, he's right up there for me. But no. Today, we're going to be chatting about 30 Days of Night and what I consider a good vampire movie. Because 30 Days of Night, starring Josh Hartnett. We just watched a lot of movies with Ethan Hawke lately, so Josh Hartnett and Ethan Hawke, for some reason, are intrinsically linked in my mind. I don't know why. I really, really don't. I think it's because they were stars of similar caliber at the same time in the 90s, and I was like, oh, yeah, I know who both of them are, so they're just linked to me. Have nothing in common with each other. And I know that they are completely different people, but for me, they're very similar. And Melissa George and is it Sam? I'm sorry, I'm a little all over the place to get today, and I apologize. But also starring Danny Houston as Marlowe and Ben Foster as the Stranger. 30 Days of Night follows what should be a normal routine for this city in Alaska to, go dark for 30 days. And this is something that does happen in northern parts of Alaska. However, a giant steamer ship plows into the harbor full of vampires. Now, granted, there's only about 20 vampires in total, but they wreak havoc. Most of the island is, in fact, uninhabited due to the impending night, 30 days of night, because most people, they can't handle it. They don't want to and the snow gets very bad, very intense. So they go south for, the month. So there's just kind of a handful of people left, the people that really stick around and people that got stuck, like Melissa George's character. There's also a lot of interpersonal drama happening between Melissa George and Josh Hartnett's characters, but I don't give a shit. Like, don't get me wrong, I think it's cute to try and include, like, a love story in a vampire movie, but in all actuality, that's not why I watch these movies. I watch them for the raw, carnal, predatory nature of the vampire. Now, I know that doesn't exactly fall in line with my Dracula Dead and Loving It love. That hits for a whole different reason. Because I am also a huge fan of camp. I love campiness. I love humor. I love comedies. That is my wheelhouse. Comedies, musical theater, that is my fucking wheelhouse. The only true horror authority that I have is in folklore or in vampire movies, because those are the two things that I really delved into. When I was in high school, I did want to write, the next great teen paranormal book, because Twilight had just hit it big. The Twilight movies had just come out, and the Twilight books were very big at my school. I'm going to apologize if you hear my dog eating in the background, but she loves food. So, anyway, when it comes to an actual vampire movie, I think 30 Days of Night is one of those few that hit the predatory nature of a vampire very, very head on. Historically, lore about vampires, they're not pretty. They're horrific. They're monsters. Their fingernails grow long. Their hair is matted and dirty. They're covered in grave dirt. Like, that's something that a lot of vampire movies have strayed away from, because nobody really wants to watch that. We can see that with Voyage of the Dawn Treader, which, by all accounts, is a fantastic vampire movie. That is a vampire who hunts. That is a vampire who is a monster, who has to hunt and kill to survive. This is not some tortured pretty boy soul, Which is why, like in Lost Boys, Michael can go F himself. Michael can go get fucked. Okay? I don't give a shit about Michael. I don't give a shit about Corey Haim. I really don't give a shit about Corey Feldman. I don't give a shit about the Frog Brothers. Oh, that's not true. That's not true at all. I love the Frog Brothers. I wish they had gotten their own movie before I found out what a fucking creep Corey Feldman is. Look, what he went through as a child is horrific, and nobody should ever, ever have been put through that. That does not give you an excuse to continue to perpetuate that online or in real life. However, my favorite characters in that movie, so, got a little bit too excited. Chill. But my favorite character in that movie is David. Kiefer Sutherland's portrayal of David is not as this, broken-hearted antagonist anti-hero. No, he's a fucking villain. He is the monster under your bed. Even in his whole little speech where he's like, "You'll never grow old. You'll never die. But you must feed." He says it in such a way that it's seductive. It's not, a warning. No, it's, I can give you this. I can give you everything that you want. All you have to do is feed. You have to serve me. And it's not in a sexual way. It's not in a loving way. It's I can free you, but you have to do this. And I think that says a lot about the nature of a movie vampire. Again, we don't see that a lot nowadays. We see a lot more of our antagonist being this sort of anti-hero, this sort of guy that we want to root for. Think back to True Blood. Now, I will admit I have not actually watched True Blood, but I have picked up on context clues. And I do plan on watching it. It's not like I don't plan on watching it or I'm not going to watch it. Eventually I'll get there. But I don't want some great... Or The Vampire Diaries. The Vampire Diaries really pisses me off because in the beginning, Damon Salvatore is a fucking vampire. He's a fuck-mothering vampire. And through convoluted storylines that make no sense, none whatsoever, they turn him into this mushy, human-loving piece of crap. Okay, they turn him into Stefan. Which totally undermines why that character was so attractive in the first place. Damon Salvatore is an attractive character, not just because Ian Somerhalder is a very attractive man, which he is. Creepy as he is, he's very attractive. Damon is the animalistic side of the vampire. He's the hunter. He's the predator. He's the seducer. Stefan is the whiny crybaby that we all make fun of for being a vegetarian. He's our Edward Cullen, which Edward Cullen can go get fucked too. The Volturi had it right, okay? He can go get fucked. I love Robert Pattinson, but that's some kind of Mormon purity BS, in my opinion. That whole book series. And I can't. I was a very big Twihard in the early days. And I will say, I never gravitated towards Edward. I gravitated towards Emmett. I gravitated toward the big old grizzly bear. I was Team Jacob, if I'm being perfectly fucking honest. Not because like I thought he and Bella should be together, but because I thought he was genuinely better than Edward Cullen. I thought Edward Cullen was just a sad boy, and I don't like sad boys most of the time. Most of the time. There are a few certain sad boys who make their way in, but all of them got an edge. Okay? Anyway, back to the topic at hand, actual vampire movies. There have been a slew lately of Dracula-based movies. We had The Invitation and Voyage of the Dawn Treader come out. Now listen, I was super skeptical about Voyage of the Dawn Treader, mostly because it is from a single chapter in the book. Not even a chapter, really, just a passage about Dracula's destruction on the Dawn Treader. However, that movie became an actual vampire movie to me the minute I saw Dracula. The minute that those Romanen crewmen did not want to load that crate onto the boat. The fact that they chose to go with a Nosferatu-inspired look for Dracula says a lot to me about what kind of movie these people were making, and I loved it. I think that movie should get more credit. I really do. My only complaint, and this is kind of a big one, the movie has a huge flaw, and that's the whole thing. The whole thing would be thrown off if Renfield were there. If Renfield had been aboard that ship, the whole movie would have been derailed, and the whole movie could not have happened. Their omission of the Renfield character was smart, and I think that's an interesting deviation from the source material. However, it would not have held up. If Renfield had actually been there, then a lot of the hunting, a lot of the discovery of who and what Dracula is probably wouldn't have happened. Renfield would probably lure people in, would probably talk people into going down there, and yeah, they might have realized that Dracula was a vampire, an abandoned ship, and everything like that would have continued to happen, but I highly, highly, highly doubt that. I think Renfield could have persuaded more people to go down there, or even like a more consistent bloodstream could have been found with Renfield. I just feel like Renfield being there as Dracula's valet negates Voyage of the Dawn Treader almost entirely, but the fact that they didn't include him was very, very smart. But speaking of Renfield, I know a lot of people didn't like that movie either. Personally, I did. The vampires we see in that movie, a la Nicolas Cage and Ben Schwartz, are vampires. They're not crazy even Renfield is like a good embodiment of what a vampire's familiar or thrall would be. Quite honestly, I think that they're wonderful depictions, even if they are on the more comedic side of what a vampire and his familiar should be. I do like the spin that they took it, as an abusive workplace relationship. I think that's fantastic. And I like that they didn't make it that like Renfield was super in love with Dracula and that he was trying to get out and all that kind of stuff. I enjoyed that. I especially enjoyed Awkwafina's performance as sort of the straight man, the everyman, because she just kind of had to accept everything, and she was great. That whole movie was great. And honestly, Nicolas Cage, I am here for the Cage Renaissance, y'all. I am here for it. Now, don't get me wrong. I have been watching his indie stuff. My husband is a huge Nicolas Cage fan, so of course I've been watching things like Pig, which is a fantastic movie. If you haven't seen it, I highly recommend. Voyage of the Ghostland, I think it's what it's called. I can't quite remember. But then The Immeasurable Weight of Massive Talent. That movie is perfect. If you're a Cage fan, if you're a Pedro Pascal fan, that movie is perfect. If you're a fan of that type of like spy movie, it's perfect. It's a great movie. It's fun to watch. It's a lot of fun to just sit there and like, Nicolas Cage did that. Oh my God, he's got the twin. It's fun. It's a fun watch. And honestly, that's what I determine a good movie by. It doesn't have to have good acting. It doesn't have to be a good storyline for me. It does, have to be fun to watch. Which brings me back to 30 Days of Night. It's not normally my type of horror. It's a lot darker than what I would normally go go for, a little bit gorier than I would normally go for. I love slasher movies, do not get me wrong, but I am not a fan of gratuitous gore, which 30 Days of Night, in my opinion, does kind of vie on that line. Like, don't get me wrong, it's no Terrifier or Evil Dead Rise or any Eli Roth movie for that matter, nowhere near that. But for a casual viewer, it's a lot of blood. Okay? Nah, it's not quite as much blood as or violence as like a Scream movie or Freaky, which are also very good campy horror movies. But it can be a lot for some people. I will say that the vampire kills are very creative. The vampires themselves are an incredible design, in my opinion, and it does come from the comic book version, which was the definitive version of this before the movie. Written by Steve Niles. Steve Niles actually did shop the script around before turning it into a comic book, which makes sense. It flows like a movie. It moves like a movie. Oh, hello, son. Thank you for blowing out my face. Thank you. I appreciate that. Anyway, but the fact that they brought in a linguist to create this vampire language from scratch, I think really speaks to the testament of this movie being so well done. And it is very highly regarded, as it should be. This is one of those horror movies that I would encourage a lot of people to watch. Josh Hartnett's journey from the beginning of the movie to the end is a fantastic thing to watch. Danny Houston as the head vampire Marlowe is one of the most powerful, almost like nearly silent performances that I've seen in a while. Even though the movie came out in 2007, you don't get a whole lot of movies where, you know, your main baddie isn't, you know, talking and talking and talking and talking and talking. I will say that's one of the things that I really appreciated about the John Wick movies. In those movies, nothing is said without purpose. Everything in those movies has a purpose when it is said, and I enjoy that type of screenwriting. You know, don't get me wrong, like they're the type of movies, like 30 Days of Night and the John Wick movies are the type of movies where nothing should be said unless it is important. It's not a comedy, it's not a romance, you know, like things aren't just said to be said. But they do it well. There are movies that don't do it as well. I can't think of any off the top of my head, but you know, there are some movies that take themselves a little bit too seriously, a little bit too importantly when they shouldn't. Anyway, excuse me, I've got a runny nose. Like the weather just finally turned here in Oklahoma, and it's just now starting to get to the real cold, but not cold. Like last week we had 60-degree weather. Thank you, global warming, I guess. I don't know. Thanks, climate change, for having us a mild winter so far, which means it's only going to get worse in January. Anyway, 30 Days of Night. I just think that the acting in 30 Days of Night is incredible, especially from Josh Hartnett, especially from Danny Houston. And honestly, Ben Foster as the stranger, I think, is wonderfully repulsive. A lot of that does go with like the costuming, making him look disgusting and dirty, fucking up his teeth, all that kind of stuff. But the acting he does through all of that is so good. He's insane. He's crazed. And then when Danny Houston comes at the end and said he's going to take him and he ends up killing him, you could see the pain and the hurt in his eyes when he thought he was going to be left behind, and then the terror when he was done away with. It was fantastic acting from Mr. Foster, honestly. I haven't seen a lot of his work, I'll admit, but 30 Days of Night is a powerhouse move for him, for sure. Last thing I kind of want to talk about with this movie, like, don't get me wrong, these Review the Q movies or videos are not going to be long by any means. So there's that. But last thing I really want to touch on with 30 Days of Night is the final scene. With Ethan, or God damn it, I did it again. With Josh Hartnett and Melissa George, and him burning to ashes, because it is one of those things in a vampire movie that I think is powerful. It's the hero corrupt, and once he's been corrupted, he can no longer be saved. And honestly, I kind of like that message in something like a vampire movie. You have to let something into your body that's so perverse and so against nature that it's literally undead. It is the very antithesis of what nature intended. I know there's a lot of talk about vampires being the perfect predator and that being what nature has been intending. I disagree. The fact that you have to die first and then be brought back either by venom or by curse or what have you, it changes it for me. It makes it more perverse. It makes it deeper than just a surface level thing. You have to die to become a vampire, which, I mean, by all rights in nature, once you die, that's it. You're done. You cannot come back from that. However, with a vampire, you do. And that to me is so against nature. And to have somebody like your main hero, as in Midnight Mass and 30 Days of Night, to have them willingly accept that into their body for the greater good. And I do mean for the greater good of humanity, well, for their little group of humanity, to save them. Although in Midnight Mass, it wasn't to save a whole group of people, it was more to save himself from himself. But Midnight Mass is a whole delve into a different psychology and theological discussion, quite honestly. But there's a scene towards the end of the series where our main character burns. And I think that is such a cathartic release for our hero character who has invited this parasite, this perverse nature into his own body, to let go, to be free, to not have any more burdens on himself anymore. And we see that in 30 Days of Night as well. At the end of the movie, he saved as many people as he could. He tried to save the town as much as he could. He did what he could. He stopped what vampires he could. He did everything that he could do in those 30 days to save as many people as he tried to. And so he was rewarded with death. Now, granted, it was not, the sweet release of death. It was a horrible burning inferno of death. But here's the thing. He lets out this almost anguished sounding cry, but to me it didn't sound as anguished as I think Mr. Hartnett intended it to. It sounded like a release. It sounded like, I'm done. You know what I mean? And that's something that I like about vampire movies in general. We're generally going to have a main character, hero type who, at the end of the day, they realize that, well, yeah, they killed these vampires. There's probably more. I'm probably going to have to do more work. What I like about Midnight Mass and what I like about 30 Days of Night is you don't have that. Well, yeah, we realize that there is more of an impending threat of vampires. We realize that there are more vampires out there. Possibly not in Midnight Mass, although the possibility of there being more ancient vampires, lurking around Jerusalem is definitely something that's thrown out there. It's not unheard of, just saying. But our hero doesn't have to deal with that. He's done his job. And I appreciate when a hero doesn't have to keep doing their job. Now don't get me wrong, there are some heroes that I think do deserve sequels and do deserve, to keep going and keep working, but damn it, I'm tired. And I think that's another thing I liked about 30 Days of Night was the finality of that story. Now, I understand there's a sequel. I understand that it came out about 3 years after the original movie. I'm talking about this movie as an enclosed thing. And we've been seeing, especially with the freaking MCU, DCEU, all that kind of stuff, these people don't get a break. Chris Hemsworth is working on Thor 5. For what? For what? I've seen him do other things so much better. I'm not saying that I don't like the Thor movies, but damn it, I'm tired. I was tired after Infinity Wars. Okay? Don't get me wrong. A superhero movie will always have its place, but enough is enough for a while. And I say that as somebody who is a complete, Marvel fan. I say that as somebody who would watch any animated DC movie that you throw at me. I'm serious. The animated ones only, please. Especially if Kevin Conroy or Troy Baker is Batman. which I will get on that whole subject of Troy Baker sounding almost identical to both Kevin Conroy and Mark Hamill at the same time a whole different day. Okay? But goddamn. Anyway, I'm going to wrap up this talk about 30 Days of Night and just in general vampire movies by saying this. I love a bloodsucker. I love a predator. I love vampires. Dear God, please give us more vampire movies. And I mean actual vampire movies. I don't mean like The Invitation. Like, I have seen actors in The Invitation do better things. That movie was honestly so bad. It was such a reference callback to Bram Stoker's Dracula and such a callback to the original Dracula book and the 1930s movie that I was distracted by it. If you're gonna make references in a movie, they should not be that distracting. They should not be that on the nose. Okay? There was a whole movie, Renfield, where there was references galore to both Christopher Lee Hammer horror version of Dracula and Bela Lugosi version of Dracula. There was references all over the place. And you know what? It was a much better movie because they didn't lean in to those references. Nay. What they did was they referenced it and moved on. They referenced it and moved on. Anyway, I'm going to get off my soapbox now. My plea is for a new vampire movie that's not about Dracula. All right, guys. I'm going to be back next week. I'm going to be doing a little Christmas-themed video for y'all. It's going to be talking about Christmas movies in general. So if y'all want to leave some of your favorite Christmas movies down in the comments, I appreciate that. Please go back and watch previous episodes of the show. Please go back and, listen to the podcast. Hit me up on Spotify. And I love y'all faces. I do. And I will see you next time. Bye.